saw some of you say 34 years, probably longer than some of you have been in the world. And believe me, I have war scars to show, being an educational leader. Let me just give a really quick background. I was a classroom teacher for 16 years, 10 of those 8th grade. The few and the proud. But I loved that age group. And then, because I started in CPS back in the mid-'80s, I'm dating myself, and a lot was going on back then as it is right now. And for 3 years in a row, there was a strike. I don't know if any of you are old enough to remember that. But anyway, it started me questioning, did I choose the right field? And so right after that, then LSCs, some would say LSCs, that was a new concept. And then that came in and it caused a number of other changes in leadership. And principals were kind of running scared because of this body that could, with 3 votes at that time, say goodbye no matter how good of a job you had done. And so as I was mulling that over and the changes, because back then, if you were a brand new teacher, you were treated like a sub, and you could be picked up and actually moved. And this was when the central office was on Pershing Road. All right, so anyway, long story to get to, I left CPS, and then I joined up with the parochial school. And as you can see from my bio, I have had experience probably in every school iteration that there is. And so I stayed for 3.5 years, and then went to parochials, spent 10 years. And at that time, unless you were a good Catholic, you couldn't go further in administration. You had to just remain a teacher. So at that point, I was beginning to feel like, you know, I've kind of got this teaching thing down pat, and I'd like to go into leadership. Fast forward to 1999, the charter movement hit Chicago. And so at that time, CPS wasn't as forgiving about if you left the system to do something else and wanted to return. So I figured my segue back into public education would be to start with a charter system. And it was still really new, a lot of exciting things were happening, and that was my first entree into school leadership. And at that point I was an assistant principal and got my feet wet in terms of leading a team of about 10 teachers, upper school, so middle school model, and that was really rewarding experience in terms of developing what I thought leadership should look like. Put a pin in that. So now the title of my little talk is Building Leadership Capacity. Are you a strengths finder? And so when you think of building, the definition in Webster says that to build is to mold, to form, to create. But I really like the facet of the definition. It's to construct, which usually refers to complex situations. And isn't leadership complex? Yes, because you're dealing with not just the things of leadership, the people in leadership. And of course, that's what adds to the complexity of understanding how to identify strengths. And strengths are defined as skills, talents, passions, mindsets. All of those things go into the affective part of leadership. And so as you're thinking about your tenure as school leaders, then you need to think about what are your core values and how will you be a strengths finder? Not just in others, you have to include yourself. Because how many of you are familiar with the book, Strengths Finders? Don Clifton, the guru of oh goodness, lost my thought. The guru of strength psychology. And so what he did is, and if you've ever taken the assessment, that was one of the most valuable self-assessments I've ever taken. 34 themes of strengths. And you actually gravitate, or you're kind of composed of 5. And then, of course, there are elements under each of those. If you've not ever taken that, I would really recommend that you do. It's very insightful. And also with your leadership teams, as you're establishing your leadership teams, whether it's an assistant principal, other school leaders, ILT leaders, all of those teacher leaders, have them to take that too, because it's very helpful for you to know from what vantage point people look at leadership in, and then of course, how are they equipped to handle the rigors of leadership. And sometimes I wonder, do we encourage people to go into leadership far beyond their readiness? Because what happens is, a person could be a fantastic classroom teacher, and they're cultivating leadership within that classroom with their students. Does that automatically mean that they should become a formal leader in the school? For example, we always, condition them to think that, well, you're being complacent if you stay in this role. But if all the wonderful classroom teachers who are effective in what they do in building community, building leadership in their classrooms, leave that, and then they go into a formal leadership position and then find that this really wasn't for them, now we potentially lose that credibility that we have. We lose that talent. We lose that very valuable resource that we have. So as you're thinking about your leadership and what are your strengths, and then if you find that you gravitate towards certain ones, then a smart leader will find those persons on their team that fill in those gaps. For example, if one of your strengths is orderliness or organization, and you're almost OCD with it, okay, maybe your structural thinking needs to be offset by a person who's a bit more creative. And so when you're mining out, think of a builder who has to first of all sit down and see how much money do they have to build. Then what is the purpose of the structure that they're building? Then who do they need to reach out to? Because building something you can't do alone. If you do, it'll take an awfully long time and you probably will give up before it's completed. What else do you need to consider when you're building? You need to look at what resources you have available. And so for those of you who are going into or have gone into leadership positions where you inherit a staff, for example, well, you may not have the luxury to go out and find people that you believe are the best. And so being a strengths finder means that you will have to take what's there and then help people to discover their talents or to discover and redirect. And of course, remember we talked about complexity? When you go in and you see what resources you have available, it first of all takes time. It also takes the willingness to build relationships, not just around the work, because people will accept your leadership when they believe that you care. And that's not touchy-feely, because in this current climate in education, accountability is probably the top priority. In accountability, it doesn't have to mean that you disregard humanity. And I see that happen so often where when you even have to have a difficult conversation where you do have to address inappropriateness or you have to address poor professional practice, doing that in a way that still respects a person's humanity exhibits your leadership in the sense that you're not trying to kill and assassinate. Instead, you can take that deficiency, if you will, and turn it and help that person to discover either how to redirect that use of a strength, because as you know, any strength can become something that can detonate your success if done too extremely. So you want to be able to develop these relationships around the work, around your leadership, where you're constantly modeling what this appropriate behavior looks like. You have to take that mantle on as the school leader to model, to show the way. And sometimes when you're a strengths finder, you have the obvious talents of what people are able to do. And then you have latent talents that you have to kind of help surface. They're there, but they've been either dormant. Then you have buried talents, where you have to really start digging, because how many of you can think of people on your staff that if you had your choice, you would probably help them to see their way out, and you're kind of stuck. So in the meantime, you can either decide to let them really get to you and not accomplish your goals, or either you can, again, dig really deep to that buried treasure and help them to either shift or find and discover what those strengths are, and then of course turn them to a more positive use. So as I close, actually, because I have all these wonderful folks who are coming after me and I want to save it for the youth. But if I were to give you some advice about being a strengths finder and what you do to build capacity, remember, accountability doesn't have to hurt, because the goal is, in education, everybody should grow. And it should be some sense of nurturing. Now again, I'm not saying coddling. It's still addressing the things that need to be done to help people to grow. And sometimes it is through a message that may not be very happy. But remember, even when you're giving this feedback, remember, if you were on the receiving end, how would you want that message presented to you? Is this accountability? Is it a vehicle for making people feel shamed? Or is it that we really want them to understand and reflect on their practice, reflect on the way that they relate to students and their colleagues, and then, of course, the world at large? Because we're sending children out, and as you know, we have to model the way of what that looks like, even in finding the strengths within the classroom, the students. So with that, I will close with, are you a strengths finder? Thank you.